Tommy Heffernan is a vet, well-known vet, and they're going to put together a few props on the stage here. Sit back and relax and enjoy this presentation about calf health. So, Tommy, I'll hand over to you, and then we'll be back with our final panel a little later.
I think I'm live there. Good evening. Good evening, Mayo. Tough evening. Mayo man leaving the Oval Office, Donald Trump going in. Look, thanks very much to Damien and Aurivo. Just give us a few minutes to set up here. I have about 40 minutes here. We were in Letterkenny this morning, and I learned a lesson. Someone said to me before I started, they said, are you nervous? And I said, no, I'm not nervous. I'm used to doing these now, so I'm not nervous. And I proceeded to put up the gut on the stage, and it started blowing up. And I started discovering there was no room for me, and I didn't know where the water went, and I forgot what I was going to say. And I said, oh, shite. So I suppose the lesson is that we're all human, and it's all about progress, right? So when I do these talks, I sometimes find that I give people a lot of information maybe, and I don't want people going home and saying, oh God, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. But if you think about that small thing of just getting better each time. So I didn't do the greatest performance of my calf roadshow life this morning, but hopefully I'll do a little bit better in Mayo this evening. So the lads were insistent that the gut was to go up, so it is going up behind me. Okay, so I think of all my gear here. I'm just going to move this over as well. So usually I do this in an hour. I feel like the anyone see the village people supporting Trump last night? I'm all about Trump. I feel like the village people here with the gut and everything, but usually I do this in an hour. So hopefully I'll cover as much stuff as I possibly can and keep it practical as well. Right, we're nearly ready to go. Okay, right, the story behind the props. Right, the story behind the props. So I'm going to talk about calf health. And obviously, when we think about health, we think about disease. And what's your most precious resource? I'd say your time, is it? Could be. It's a lot of yours anyway. And sick calves take time. We use antibiotics. There's a cost to it. So I love talking about health. So I'm also a very visual learner. You might have guessed that by my presentation. So I was trying to come up with a way of how do you cover calf health and kind of keep it simple. So no matter what disease it is, and maybe there's not all dairy farmers in the audience, but whether it's infectious lameness, it's mastitis, even if it's ourselves, we're always trying to balance two things. And Deirdre, you're a nurse, you know this. We're trying to rise up immunity, and we're trying to drive down infection pressure. So that's a really simple principle, but I find it quite useful, especially when a lot of the things that I think about with calf health they're a kind of series of habits. So we know that we'd all love to have healthy calves, and sometimes things are out of our control, but it's a series of habits. So what are the things that influence immunity? So what we want to do with scales is we want to drive up immunity and we want to drive down infection pressure. So I'm a vet, and this is my mobile gut. Someone asked me one time, is that a mouth you have? And the idea of the gut is to bring the story to life around precision microbes, but I'll use it a little bit today. So when we think about calves, and we think about the successful habits of calf rearing and this immunity and seesaw thing, obviously the one that most of you are probably sick of vets talking about now is colostrum, but it still makes up a huge part of the calf health story. So it's really key. So I'm going to talk about colostrum and bore you about colostrum tonight again. So why is colostrum different to normal milk? It's got twice the fat and protein in it. That's the one thing about nature, is it's very interesting when you observe it and watch how it works. So this is another. So imagine this is my udder, a cow or a heifer. You can make up your own mind. So it's got twice the fat and protein. The cow and the heifer starts brewing this colostrum 7 to 14 days before calving. So one of the things you have to remember, if you have poor quality silage, be it low energy or low protein, you may risk, even though the cow or heifer will do an awful lot to ensure quality of colostrum, but you may risk quality if you have poor forages, maybe in the pit. But also, we can actually supplement cows and heifers as they come up to calving, and we can actually influence colostrum quality. So we always talk about, that's the first building block of immunity. We want to ensure that the colostrum that the cow or heifer produces is high quality. So we can actually measure that in farm if we want to. This is a little gadget called a colostrometer. We'll see will he beat the Donegal crowd. Anybody here using this? That was a poor performance. You could put up your hand just to support me if you wanted. Right, so at the end of the day, right, I'm sure there's more than that, but it's a nice handy little tool. Even for if you're calving in heifers, to get an idea of colostrum quality, if you're looking at a sample and you're wondering, and especially I find this probably the most useful if you're actually putting colostrum in the freezer. So it's a very useful device. You can measure colostrum quality on it. There's loads of stuff on the internet. So we want to start off with quality. The next thing we want to do is we need to get that in quickly. And when we think about why do we want to get it in quickly, note for the next meeting I need a bigger table. Why do we want to get it in quickly? Because if we think about our cows and heifers' immune systems, this is an immune cell here. Basically, our cows and heifers have built up a knowledge of disease on our farm. So they've come across bugs, they've created these antibodies. So the next time they see these bacteria, this is my bug, my bacteria, it's not life-size, just in case anyone's wondering going home looking for this. So they create these antibodies. And cows, ruminants are different to us. We get our antibodies through our placenta from our mothers, but calves have to get it through bee stings or colostrum. And that's important because we want to get the colostrum, we've got the quality, we want to get it in quickly into the gut. And the reason we want to get in is the digestive tract of the calf isn't fully developed. There's a thing called pinocytosis. It takes these antibodies in, and some of them even sit along the gut. So we want to get it in quickly, we want the right quantity. And I suppose when we think about quantities on the dairy side, it's 3 to 4 litres. Now, you've heard that a million times before. But it is foundational. I'm involved with this company. We sell a product. We don't give it away for free. Colostrum is free, okay? The other thing I'll say, just a tip for dairy farmers, something that I think is probably a missing piece in the link, because you're all very good at getting quality, the quantity, and getting it in quickly, is we've got colostrum that's got twice the fat and protein of normal milk. So when you have colostrum, and you'll all know this from your own farms, it leaves a slimy layer on buckets and dump buckets and stomach tubes. And there's a problem because there's something loves that slimy layer, and it's bugs, particularly E. coli. And the challenge is you could have done a lot of good work with colostrum and suddenly you're rising up the infection pressure. And why that matters is the gut is open to take in these antibodies, but if we actually have a lot of bugs going in colostrum, it can actually affect absorption. So what's the practical tips for that? So the practical tips is, think about, so I have a little gadget here. I'm like Inspector Gadget. I have a little gadget, and it's a digital machine for reading hygiene. So you don't exactly, it's not a great job going in on farm and telling people this is dirty or that's dirty. It's a very special gadget for looking at areas, and it gives you a digital reading when you swab them. And the one area that I always seem to see an issue with is the dump bucket. It doesn't get the same attention. So just think about your dump bucket on your farm in the springtime from that kind of hygiene perspective. Stomach tubes. So if we're storing colostrum and it's getting over 10 degrees, after 5 or 6 hours, the bugs are going to replicate. And what's happening is all the work you've done earlier on, if you're feeding that colostrum, you're at risk of putting in a lot of bugs into the gut. I'm a big fan of storing colostrum, storing excess colostrum if you can get it into the fridge. Ideally, when you're storing colostrum, you want something that's easy to fill with a good big surface area, because when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, the time you actually want it, it's easy to defrost it. So a very simple tip, and a lot of farmers are doing this, even though you're not putting up your hands, are measuring colostrum and putting the quality stuff in the fridge so you know when you need it, you can give it to a calf. Another trick with the colostrum is, this is why I like the props, is all these antibodies are still in this colostrum. So when I'm defrosting this colostrum, if I can't put my hand into the water, I don't want to put the colostrum into the water either. So you'll undo a lot of the good that you've already done. The last thing, and Damien, wherever he's gone to, he went for a coffee when I was talking earlier this morning. He's probably gone to the bar for a Guinness this time. Basically, he was saying about positive things, okay? And I do a lot of driving. I'm driving back to Wicklow tonight. I was on listening to a podcast last week, one of these health podcasts. I like human health. And in the ad and halfway, they were selling bovine colostrum for $9.99. Not for calves, but for humans. Because the medical companies have realized there's all these things in colostrum that are of huge value to health. So I just want to really emphasize again, we're only learning about colostrum. It's got other stuff in it. This is back to my other again. It's got prebiotics in it. It's got all these hormones that are basically there for a real purpose, helping the gut develop, helping the genetics of the animal develop. So unfortunately, you're sick of hearing vets talk about colostrum, but it ultimately is worth spending time on it, getting it right, and storing it and using it correctly. Okay, so that's one, that's colostrum. The next thing on a positive note as well is, there's two elements to looking at this. So we've done a good job in colostrum, we'll say our scales is like that. So the next thing is feeding calves. And colostrum and feeding are probably the two main areas. And I think before I start on feeding the calf, we kind of have to think about, this is milk powder, but obviously milk. Think about what we produce. We produce such a high quality product. So I have 5 kids. Well, at least I think they're all mine. And basically, I love seeing them drinking milk, eating yogurts, meat, animal proteins. Why? Because of the quality amino acids in there, the quality fat, the lactose. I mean, it's just a high quality product. So when we reverse that and we think about our calves and we think about milk feeding, I think we have to make the connection between feeding milk to calves and immunity and performance. So we know from a dairy farm perspective, all the research will show that if we can do a good job in calves in the first weeks of life, obviously we'll get less disease, but we'll also impact the future lifetime performance. We'll get more milk from our heifers in the future and better performance from our beef. So if I think about a dairy calf, I think about milk at the 12.5% solids, the same solids you get paid for, but think about those solids, that protein and fat. So what's it doing when it goes into the digestive tract? It's driving the frame of the animal, it's driving the hormone system, it's driving the immune system. So the immune cells, they require energy. So many functions. Again, fat is really important. It's a really important energy source. So if I have dairy calves, if I have calves and they're on a lower plane of nutrition and it's colder, the challenge is that the calf is working hard to stay going. And if it gets cold and they come under pressure, the first thing that's going to be left behind is the immune system. So we kind of have to make, that link between immunity and feeding. I suppose the other thing that's a bit boring, to be honest with you, but I travel around a lot and I look at farms and you're always looking for the magic solution. And there isn't. The story with success with calf rearing is consistency and attention to detail. And calves are the future of your herd, their production and performance animals, but attention to detail and consistency is key, and it's really important with feeding. So getting value off that second and third milk, the transition milk, just, I suppose, timing of feeding and volumes. And I think it's a big audience, and sure enough, I'll probably get in a row with someone about feeding now here because it was, I'm going to say the wrong thing, but I think we need to look at feeding calves more milk. And if I was to come back here in 10 years' time, hopefully Mayo will have won in All-Ireland. And the other thing would be that we will all be feeding more milk because it's kind of logical that milk, we're talking about the quality of the products we produce. Calves don't get any calories for the first 4 weeks. Their rumen only starts developing. So they're very, very dependent on milk. So we need to look at more milk. I think people get worried about scours. I don't see when you give calves more milk scours. The other thing I think is you need clean water. And one thing I've learned is with calves, we're obviously trying to wean them. So you want concentrates, fresh concentrates in from early. And I don't think we should be weaning a group of calves unless they're consuming at least 2 kilos a meal as a group. The other tricks I think with calves is a lot of you will be using automatic feeders because time is your most precious resource. So again, just with feeders, positioning right. The problem with the feeder is it's great for time, but it kind of tips the scale because all the calves come to one point here, okay? So again, automatic feeders, the other thing I see with it is just learn how to calibrate it. If you're getting issues with bloat on feeders, make sure you test water as well. I often go into especially seasonal systems and you see a header tank sitting up there and it's active for about 5 months of the year and then it might lay dormant. And when you use stagnant water, you can get issues. Okay. I don't know where Declan is to keep an eye on time. So how am I going on time, Declan, today? I have 30 minutes left. Oh, geez. Okay, good. I can slow down. Right, okay. So next thing is, in fairness, we got a lot of questions at the last talk, so we'll leave a bit of time for questions. The next thing is probably a very simple one, again, from the seesaw, is how can I reduce down infection pressure? And this is hygiene. So in fairness, hygiene, I'd probably make a very, very bad calf rearer. Because if you go out to my car, there's the coffee cups from last week in it and lots of other things. And I suppose hygiene is kind of a habit. And some of us are good at it, some of us aren't. So we really need to think about, you can be cleaning all day. Where are the key areas you need to clean? And again, if we think about the bugs that affect calves, so 70% of diseases in a pre-weaned calf are scour. So scour is the main thing. Most of the scour bugs are on our farm. They're coming from our cows. The other thing is pneumonia. And again, the cows tend to have an immunity built up, but they tend to be the source of disease. So when it looks at hygiene, it's just another part and a tool in helping reduce the spread of disease. So there's a problem with hygiene, I always find. So you wouldn't mind shaking my hand? Okay. Sorry, you wouldn't mind shaking my hand now, would you? So it's always easier to think about things when we can visualize them and see them. So disease is invisible, okay? And one man actually shook my hand one night. It was very embarrassing. Anyway, so all I'm trying to say is when we think about hygiene in calves, we're trying to think about something we can't see. So again, because I have a bit of time, I'll tell my glitter story. When we think about calves, the problem with our calves is the cows produce the bugs, be it crypto or scour or whatever it is. The calves ingest them, and they can go in 100 and they'll produce 1 billion oocysts out the back of cryptosporidium, whatever it is. And again, if they're huge numbers sometimes, and it's hard to comprehend. So I have kids at home, like I mentioned, and when the glitter comes out in the house, we'll still see glitter a week later, okay? It'll be everywhere. So I said, I was working with a farm at the time and I was trying to explain I said, I'll bring the glitter with me now the next time I'm going out there. I had an issue with scour. And I was saying to Sean and Mary, I said, look, it's like the calf has ingested this many oocysts and it's like producing this much. So I was pouring them around the shed. And in fairness to Mary, she got it, but Sean was kind of thought I was losing my mind. Until about 3 days later, Sean was eating his egg inside in the kitchen and the table started glitter up. Because the glitter I'd spread around the calf pen had gone all the way into the house. And I suppose he thought about it from a number of reasons. So it's a bit like me shaking your hand as well. You now think about disease. So where are the areas on farm that really we are challenging from a disease perspective? The calving pen is obviously one. And again, I work with a very wise old vet in Wicklow, and he said to me, Tommy, straw solves a lot of problems. Now, getting straw is another problem, but straw and clean bedding and space in calving pens is key. You know, getting that navel cleaned. But in dairy farms, probably the dump bucket, and I think another big one is, because colostrum's got twice the fat of normal milk, is the stomach tube. So if you're stomach tubing every calf, for example, you need to probably have a couple of stomach tubes. Don't stomach tube a sick calf and then go back to tube a healthy calf. I know it's kind of simple stuff. The other area I think when it comes to hygiene is feeding equipment. And there's a bit of a problem with hygiene. And again, I can't believe I'm lecturing people on hygiene, but this is the way life goes sometimes, isn't it? My wife would be laughing at me if she heard I was lecturing people on hygiene. So if we think about feeding equipment, if we think about milk, if we think about colostrum, when we have it in a teat, a pipe, a bucket, it leaves a slimy layer. So the first layer is a kind of a fatty layer. But that fatty layer builds up over time, and the bugs love it. And the risk with feeding equipment is, particularly milk bars and teats, is that biofilm harbours a lot of infection. And it's no wonder on farms that I see a lot of less digestive issues. And I won't get into the sexes now because I get myself in real trouble. But in farms where attention to detail and cleaning is done well, there's less digestive issues. So when we think about cleaning, we all think about disinfectants. All I want you to think about is routines for the spring ahead. That there's actually a difference between detergents and disinfectants. And that's quite important. So I brought my two familiar brands that most people will know, I hope. Some lads like me who are not great in hygiene might know what this one is. Fairy Liquid. okay? Fairy Liquid's a detergent and Milton's a disinfectant. The way and you're familiar with this if you're dairy farming, you're familiar with descalers, you're familiar with acids. So the detergent is useful in feeding equipment, stomach tubes, just to get rid of that biofilm. It's very, very effective at getting rid of films of biofilm. And then something like Milton is very, very useful for cleaning, okay? Now, if you're looking at feeding equipment, even just cold water cleaning will help. But the more attention to detail, the less issues you get. And the problem with sick calves is, and you'll know better than me, is sick calves zap time. Okay, so that's the detergents and disinfectants. I'm lecturing people on hygiene. The other thing, simple thing I suppose, is that if you're rearing calves, and this applies to people, and there might be dairy to beef farmers in the audience, try and put all the calves into one pen. When you move calves around, it gets tricky. So try and get an all-in, all-out system. I used to be talking about, and I could get myself in trouble for this, always talking about removing the sick calf and isolating. But at the time you take that scoury calf out of the pen and you scour in your boots and you scour in your shed, sometimes I think I'm less about isolating calves. I think it can be very hard to do. Okay, a couple of other very simple ones. Now this is a very costly one, but it's something to think about. When we think about, we've done a great job in hygiene. We've the healthiest calves in the country. What could go wrong? So the next one for calves is space. And the same as any animal. So I get to travel a good bit with this project of a lifetime, meet all these interesting people. And you know, people who've been in business for 30 or 40 years, they're usually worth listening to. So talk to different vets and different nutritionists. And definitely when animals are indoors, probably the biggest limiting factor for performance is space. We definitely saw it post quota when we went up in numbers and space didn't. Did you get a pint, Damien? You got a coffee this morning, sorry, so anyway, so basically when we think about space, it's a very simple one, but when we've animals close together, bugs will spread, okay? And you're all, for some reason you all started coughing. There's lots of people in here tonight, right? So when we've animals close together, it's the real opportunity, particularly nasal diseases or pneumonia. So space is a huge one. And if you actually look at the legal requirement for calves, it's 1.5 meters squared. If you're building a calf house in the next 10 years, and it's great to see so many young people in the audience, because I do believe actually very strongly, like our audience said this morning, dairy industry, farming in general is a very exciting industry. But if you are building calf housing, prioritize space. It's a very, very worthwhile investment, and don't go under 2 meters per squared per calf. It really makes sense. The other thing with calves is, I was very lucky to do a bit of traveling back in 2018, and I looked a lot into this. And it's a very simple one again. So you get this on Amazon for €5. So it's warmer here tonight than it was in Letterkenny, although I felt with the gut on the stage and I nearly falling off, it was a lot hotter up there. But basically, this is a lovely little thing to have in the calf shed, because if you have this in the calf shed, you can find out what temperature it is. And that's important because actually our calves and our cows are so different. Under 15 degrees, the calf has to start working hard to stay warm. Under 10 degrees, even harder. And the problem with cold calves is it has a very direct impact on the immune system. And I don't have to tell you this. You'll be familiar with when you get sick calves is usually around weather changes. So one eye on the weather and another, just keeping an eye on the temperature. And if your temperature is dropping below 10 degrees, that morning you're out with the sprong or the spike or whatever you want to call it, maybe it's time to put out more straw, because straw is a fantastic insulator, okay? Again, if it's getting very cold, another reason to feed more milk makes a more robust calf. But definitely cold is a big challenge for the calves, very, very big one. The other thing about calves is they spend 85% of their day lying down, okay? And if they're lying on concrete is not a good insulator, it'll take heat from them. So you cannot beat good drainage, lots of straw, and a dry lie for calves. Now, how simple is that? That's pretty boring stuff, isn't it? And I've traveled all over the world and supposed to be an expert. But that's the truth. That's the farms I go into that don't see disease. It's that attention to detail, getting the moisture away, because one of our challenges in Ireland is our winters are damp and they're moist, no matter what you do. And they're the conditions that bugs love. And we're always trying to fight in that simple terms of immunity versus infection pressure. So a warm, dry lie, plenty straw. Calf jackets work well, but they need to be managed as well. They can be difficult taking them off and on, I think, but they do have a role to play as well. The next thing, I suppose, when we think about calves is the perfect shed for a calf, for calf rearing. And I've been in €1 million sheds, and I've been in sheds that are older than most of us in the room. And it's not always, you don't always have healthy calves in that perfect shed. So when we think about sheds, I just want you to think about this perspective, because I can't give you a rule book for the perfect calf house. Certainly the new calf designs there's good, but I want you to think about what we're trying to do with a shed is we're trying to reduce infection pressure, and the best way of doing that is fresh air. So there's not much fresh air in here tonight. So fresh air kills bugs, it keeps things dry, okay? But the problem is, as you all know, when we have too much bloody fresh air, Tommy, the calves are going to get drafts and get sick. And the problem is, you might have a house and you've built a calf house, the exact same calf house as they've built, because you've copied them. You listen tonight, they're amazing speakers, and I said, I'm going to copy whatever they do. And you've gone up to their yard and you've built the same shed as they have at home, but you've built it on top of a hill. And that shed becomes a different shed, okay? So calf housing becomes very specific to where your position is, where the prevailing wind is. But we do want to get fresh air into the shed. So I've come with, I suppose, the simple solution for me is a little bit more milk for the calf, a little bit of a less of a rush to get him weaned, keeping him warm, plenty of straw, and more air flowing in the shed. And I find that that's a useful solution, but we have to think about fresh air. Now, when you go home to your calf sheds, there is things you can do to look at fresh air. We have a very sophisticated device, even more sophisticated than this yoke that I have here. Anybody know what that device is? Hanging out between your eyes? Your nose. Okay? The problem with your nose is in your own farm, it never works as well as it should on your own farm. So sometimes it's no harm if somebody else comes into the yard to see. But if you're smelling ammonia in sheds, if you're getting calves with pneumonia, yes, you can look at vaccination, but you've got to look at ventilation. You've got to look at airflow in sheds. It's very, very simple. Okay, so I've covered a good few things. I'm going to answer questions now as well. A few other simple tips is ahead of the spring is water quality. Again, my little pipe. So particularly for those of you who have automated feeders or seasonal sheds with a header tank in it, if you're mixing up milk replacer, be it on an automatic feeder or you're mixing milk replacer on farm, you've got lots of protein and fat in there. Hopefully they're from an animal origin. Some of them aren't. And basically you're putting hot water in there. Now, if we have biofilm in tanks and pipes, we're putting a lot of bugs in there as well. So if you're seeing a lot of nutritional issues with calves and scour, it may be water, and it's something that's often overlooked on farm. And the problem is, when we look at water quality, we often go to where we started, maybe the well, the main was water, but we've added sheds along, and often the calf shed that you've built on top of the hill is a new addition. So it's at the very end of a long series of pipes, and water cleans itself primarily by flow. So just always, I think it's a good habit people can get into or should get into, is actually... Okay, I've never done this before. Could the owner of card reg 181 50 520 please move as it's causing an obstruction? Sligo. Oh, what did I say? 50. I got caught up in the moment. SO 181 SO 520, that makes sense. Anyone? No? Too embarrassed now to do it. I'll just do that one more time. Could the owner of car reg 181 SO, he's 5 looks like an S, 520, please move. Will I make it more urgent? No. Okay. They're not in here. All right. Okay. Where was I? Water quality. So testing water, try and test it in the shed. Okay. And a simple test you can do is go to the local council for a potable water sample. Other couple of tips is there's a lot of young people in the audience, there's a lot of technologies, a lot of things changing in farming. You cannot beat still good stockmanship. You cannot beat going through your calves every day. And I'm not from a farm. My parents were teachers. I grew up in my granduncle's farm, who was not a prodigy of efficiency. He liked poaching and drinking. But I suppose I had to learn the normal, okay? And it's a great skill. You cannot spend enough time with the normal, the healthy calf, to look at them. And then you get really good at spotting the unhealthy. And the reason that's important is because the longer an animal stays sick, the harder it is to get them to recover. So don't underestimate that simple process of going through calves every day, listening for coughing, don't ignore the wet bums, a swelling or whatever it is. And finally, I suppose myself and Robert are down the back to talk about precision microbes, because I think I'll answer a few questions now. Declan is waving at me at the background there. Finally, just don't underestimate the impact of stress, either on yourselves, more importantly, probably our animals. So we all came from apparently the jungle a long, long time ago, whatever. But basically, we have this natural instinct, both ourselves and animals. When we see a problem, we have a flight or fight system, and it was always good at getting us away from the lion. But nowadays, neither ourselves or animals use that flight or fight. But what we have instead is we have the slow production of cortisol and stress that builds up and reduces immunity. And when we look at stresses on farms for calves, some of them are unavoidable, like the weather. You can build around that with the resilience I talked about, straw, more milk jackets, etc. But just think about things like dehorning and stressors on calves, letting them out. Don't stack them together. I know time, help is short on farm, but don't stack stressors like dehorning, letting calves out. Try and do those things separately, because if we can reduce stress, we'll increase immunity and all the other bits and pieces I said as well. Do you want to do some questions, Declan? I'm conscious of time. I have to head back to Wicklow, so it'd be a good time to... We've 10 minutes of questions. Now this is, what did Damien say earlier on? It's like a funeral. No one wants to go up to the first one, then when one person shoots up, they all go up. Any questions? Good man. We've got a roaming mic, and because it's a big crowd, have we two mics or one mic? Yeah, we have a question here in the middle to start off. Don't tell me you own car 181. So.
When you say feed more milk to calves, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I left that one kind of non-specific. So at a minimum, we should be and thank you for the question, thanks for asking the first question. At a minimum, you should be feeding 3 litres twice a day, okay? Now, I know there's lots of different systems out there, and there's a lot of people who will be doing different things to what I say here tonight, including going to once a day feeding at an early age and weaning and happy and everything like that, okay? That's fine. If you're going to change, I have to say this, if you're going to change, you'll change based on you're not going to change everything's happy. You'll change basically you're not happy with the way calves are, or maybe you're at a farm that you're kind of looking where can you take your calves to next, because we know the research is saying more milk, more growth in the calf, you're going to get better performance, and you're never going to get a kilo in again in that animal's lifetime and get a kilo of weight on. So at a minimum, I would say with milk, sometimes the simple principle is whole milk and more milk, at a minimum 3 litres twice a day. If you're up to 3 litres twice a day, and you're struggling with calves, you want to see where they go to 4 litres twice a day, okay? Now, when you're starting a more milk for a calf, you have to start them early, because their stomach or abomasum needs to adapt, okay? So it's something you need to think about on farm to plan out properly, okay? Where I see issues with calves is we probably need to go up earlier and go down slower when it comes to weaning time, okay? I think we need to extend out that weaning period from 2 to 3 weeks of, to drop milk down, the weaning or the feeding curve, if you like. So when I'm saying milk, so I've been very lucky, again, and it's just an opinion, and you know what they say about opinions, right? It's just an opinion. I'm very lucky to go out to farmers who are always on the kind of edge. I learn a lot of farmers who are pushing the boundaries. And, those farmers now, and some of them have surprised me, have already started feeding more milk to calves, okay? So, and, I've been saying it, it's easy for me to say it because I'm farming with a pen, not a plough, okay? So I understand that. So I think it's something to think about. If you're going to once a day feeding, right? And you're going to once a day feeding at 3 weeks, and I know people are going early, if you go to 3 weeks and getting on fine, that's fine, okay? Just watch the space around milk. But there's a very specific reason I think in this room we're producing a high quality product. There's a very good reason I like it from my kids' point of view. It's those quality amino acids and proteins and fats that are in it, okay? And a calf is a monogastric, and they get no calories for 4 weeks. So I just see, and again from experience, from a disease perspective, I think it's something for farmers just to consider, okay? You don't have to go home and change it. Maybe you have a contrary opinion, do you?
Feeder, so it's something you could play around with.
Yeah, it's something you can play around with. Yeah, it's something you don't have to go mad. You don't have to go home and get an ad-lib feeder and suddenly your calves are like, giraffes. But I think it's something, when you think of it, like, I have read hundreds of papers on nutrition, calf, and I could go into fierce detail and try and make myself look smart. But ultimately, the more deeper I go, the further back out I come to the basics. And the basics are the most important things, but they're the hardest things to do. Okay, and feeding is kind of that building block of calf health. And milk feeding, when you think about the calf, well, they can't get any calories for 4 weeks. It makes sense that when you have a calf on 2 litres or 2.5 litres, which you rarely see nowadays, and crypto comes in, they're the calves that get wiped out because they have no resilience built up at all. All right, and again, every piece of research will look at. So we spend a lot of time, and you go to a lot of conferences, and you'll hear about genetics. But there's a thing called epigenetics. Basically, the environment and nutrition you're on will influence your genetics. Okay? Any any beekeepers in the audience? No? Sure, you're not good at putting up your hands. My parents are beekeepers, right? So they're retired teachers. They have too much time in their hands. So basically, the queen bee and the drone start out the same. The queen bee gets the royal jelly and as much of it as she wants. The drone, basically same genetics, will feed on the crap honey. The queen bee lives for 2 years and is twice the size. So it's just, we have to think about these things when we're feeding calves, and I'm planting a seed for you tonight. Not for the milk replacer salesman now, but just for your own farms in the future, okay? Thank you. That was a long-winded answer to the question. Any other questions? Yeah, question up the front here.
Thank you. Regarding the colostrum, you talk about the first feeding. What about the second feeding of the cow? Is there any benefit given that to the calf?
Great question, and thanks for asking that. So the question was that the first milk, wherever it might as well go, the first milk, too much effort. The first milk has all the immunoglobulins in it. It has all the fat and protein. But the cow in nature has a process where the second milk isn't the same, but it's still quite high in fat and protein. It still has lots of antibodies. The same antibodies, especially if you're using a vaccine, that coat the gut. Okay, they mightn't be absorbed into the bloodstream. So the second feed of colostrum, or even if you take 6 litres of colostrum off a cow or 5 litres of colostrum, the calf will only take 3 or whatever. That second 2 litres is actually an excellent feed for the calf as well. Right? There's a reason they're selling colostrum in America for $9.99 a bottle, bovine colostrum. It's because of all the goodies in it, the prebiotics that feed the gut, etc. Okay? So always try and maximize colostrum usage on farm. Get the second feed of that first milk in. Yeah, first milk. Now, when it comes to second, third, and fourth transition milk, that's an excellent feed source as well because it's higher in fat and protein. The challenge with that is when you're using that on a dairy farm, if you're pooling it together and you don't know the risk, your ionase risk, it could be it could be a sleeping giant. So I'd only really advocate for pooled transition milk feeding if you knew you were low on ionase. If you are, then maximize that transition milk. Get as much of it into calves as you can early on. It's like, there's a milk replacer copying it, basically the same thing, and useful if you've ionase, but it's of huge value for your calves. So maximize transition milk as well. It's not quite as risky when you're storing transition milk because it's not the same risk for pathogens and build-up. Colostrum, if you just took that message home tonight around handling colostrum, not leaving in buckets for 24 hours, or even a lot of farms now are basically investing in old fridges and they'll store the colostrum for 24 or 48 hours. So you get 5 or 6 litres off a cow, the calf's only going to drink 3. Well, you have 3 litres of liquid gold, basically, that you can put into the fridge. Now, you wouldn't drink it after 6 hours if you left it out for that period of time, so you just don't want to put into the calf. And it may seem a little bit panicky, but it's all these little bits. Like calf rearing is like links in the chain. It's like, it starts with the dry cow management, it goes to colostrum and all the way along. And none of you have perfect farms, I'm presuming. Anyone going to stand up? None of you have perfect farms. So there's always going to be weak links, okay? This man's after investing in a new shed. You're waiting to invest in a new shed. You're making do what you have. So it's figuring out on your farm what's the best value of all of the stuff that I said tonight, the little changes. Now, I don't want you going home scrubbing every teat for 8 hours and the calf gets no colostrum, okay? But change those teats, do those simple things well, and progress over perfection. My gut nearly knocked me off the stage this morning and I was completely put out. So I had to get up again and go tonight again, right? So I had a choice, right? Get more nervous or get on with it. So I did. So life is about progress over perfection. And at the end of the day, again, sorry, I digress, but I rang a friend of mine and he lost his wife last year and he's minding his 3 kids. One of the kids was home from school sad. So everything in perspective in life, right? So that's probably the most important message of all. A very long-winded answer again. Any other questions? One more over here.
You mentioned the dry cow there and the dry cow period, and one thing that can affect it, I suppose, this year weather was pretty kind most of the time when silage was being made, but in years where it's difficult and you have wetter's feeding or whatever, and the effects that can have on cow condition and all, the influence of that on the quality of your colostrum and the problems that can cause, because I know we've been talking about what you do with the calf after they're born and the importance of getting the colostrum in, but if your minerals is out and your condition is down and the cow is under pressure, your take on that.
Yeah, so if again, circumstances out of your control. So if your cows and your heifers are under condition and your silage quality is poor, right? The cow, in fairness to her, will do everything she can to put quality into colostrum, right? But I do know that you can supplement those cows coming up to calving time, right? With a bit of oats or soy or something like that, and it works a treat in my opinion. Again, there's no peer-reviewed research, but a lot of farmers are doing it and I see it working. So that's something you can do that's really important, okay? Nutrition far trumps any minerals and anything like that. The thing, again, you might be talking sucklers, but from a cow perspective, it's all about nutrition and energy. Calcium's probably number 2, and then your mineral and vitamins come down. They're very important. You want a good dry cow mineral going in for 6 weeks before calving, that's fine. But nutrition's the key thing. I suppose what I was trying to say that the cow quality of her colostrum, fat and protein, is 14 to 7 days before she calves. Now, some lads get scared about thinking put meal into cows coming up to calving because they think they'll have an elephant of a calf. The calf grows, most of its growth, fetal growth occurs between 7 and 8 months. So you can actually supplement a cow coming up to calving or a group of cows with a good high quality energy and protein source, and you can see quality of colostrum going up. The other thing we must always remember about cows is we're actually not feeding the cow, we're feeding the bugs inside the rumen. So a lot of times after calving, we're going to be given a pull of meal, or we're going to give more meal to the cow anyway. So I find that, it's a very unpopular term, but that steaming up on cows works quite well, where their rumen gets used to the meal and you can influence colostrum quality. So if your silage is poor, you know it's poor and your condition is poor, I definitely would supplement with energy and protein as a priority. And obviously everything else, like your parasites and your minerals, but that's the main thing for the cow around calving time, is my opinion. Do you disagree with me, Brendan? Okay. All right. Very good. Are we happy to finish up, Declan? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Mayo. Thank you. It was great. And you know what? It's great to see so many young people in the audience. And I do believe farming is a very exciting industry. I depend on, like many of the people I think who sit up here, we all depend on farmers for our living. But I think it is an exciting industry. There's been lots of challenges, of course. There's another question on the back. So my big speech is all gone, huh? Gonna go on. Yeah. Can we throw sound to the microphone there again? I'm the owner of 181 SO 520. So just the microphone down the back for one last question.
Just in relation to testing the colostrum there, let's say you test your colostrum and it's below the required level. Is it better not to feed that?
No, just feed a little bit more. Depends on the time of night. If it's 3 o'clock...
Is it better to feed it? Let's say you have a good quantity of that.
Yeah.
Is it better to feed a good quantity of that, or substitute it with, we'll say, one that's above the level of lesser quantity?
If it was my calf, I'd feed more of that lower quality product, or colostrum, right? Yeah. Again, if it was 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd definitely feed more and go back to bed happy enough. Again, that's why I try and get more farms to put colostrum in the fridge in the busy seasonal system, and just you might top up that low quality colostrum with a litre of the real good stuff you have in the top of the fridge, okay? But we have to be practical as well. The colostrum substitutes, again, none of them are as good as anywhere near, even the freeze-dried ones are nowhere near it. So I'd always feed a bit more, and that's why always try and prioritise. If you have a cow that's producing 6 litres of colostrum, the calf takes 4, put that 2 litres in the fridge. Use it as much as you can, okay? And again, practical at 3 o'clock in the morning. Your sleep is your priority first. Give that calf a little bit more of that lower quality colostrum as opposed to going off and trying to do all things and lose an hour's sleep at night. Okay? Done? Job done. Okay, thanks very much.